And so that's the way I lasted so long in the government, either in the military or in the State Department. And I found my little niche of things that I could do and felt I could do them well. But it wasn't like I totally agreed with every policy of all these administrations. But the reason I resigned on this invasion and occupation of Iraq was that, to me, for the United States to invade and occupy an oil-rich Arab Muslim country that had not attacked the United States, I thought, you know, there may be some people in the Middle East that are going to be a little bit perturbed with us, a little bit angry. And from all of my time in the State Department, I do know that America is not beloved throughout the world, that our policies have been challenged by many people of the world, that in particular the Middle East is upset because they perceive that we may have unbalanced policies in the Israeli-Palestinian issue, and that in itself is something that means that American governments, successive American governments, have all not been beloved in the Middle East because of these unbalanced policies. And until they kind of balance out, we're going to be in a hole there. And then we're digging it deeper by us invading a country that has not attacked has not attacked us, and without the authorization of the UN Security Council. You know, the Bush administration tried really hard to get the UN Security Council to okay an intervention, okay an invasion. And you all saw on TV in February of 2003 when Colin Powell, my boss, went to the UN and presented nearly a 2-hour intelligence briefing to the member states of the Security Council, and also actually the General Assembly. I think everybody was there. They wanted to see that. In fact, how many of you all watched it on TV? Yeah, I mean, I watched it. I was all the way out in Mongolia, and I watched it. I wanted to know where these weapons of mass destruction were, because I was not convinced by the materials that we had been shown so far, and I hadn't seen any more than you had. As a U.S. diplomat, the State Department was not showing diplomats around the world anything more than what you all were hearing about on TV, or what the spokesperson of the State Department was telling the world about these dangers coming from these unfound weapons of mass destruction. And despite the protestations of people who I kind of thought maybe they probably would know something, like the UN inspectors who were giving us the litany of all the things they had inspected until the inspections were called off by Saddam Hussein after the Clinton administration pulled a few little tricks on them. And it was like, well, who do you believe? And I didn't know, but Colin Powell wasn't able really to convince me solidly that there were weapons of mass destruction during that, nor was he able to convince the member states of the UN Security Council, and so they didn't vote for military operations, quite unlike what happened 12 years before during Gulf War I, when the UN okayed an international military force to go in to kick out another invader in the area, old Saddam Hussein, who had invaded Kuwait. And the U.S. intervention, along with the coalition that was formed, pushed out Saddam. So there was a little bit of a difference there, and the people of the Middle East were not going to be looking at us in the same way as the people that helped push Saddam back to his country, and now we were invading the people of Iraq's country. So I ended up saying I cannot represent these policies. And when you reach that moral dilemma of working with an administration where your job as a career diplomat or a career military person, career civil service people, is to implement the policies of whatever administration is elected by the people of the United States. And if you can't do that, then, well, you can work within the system to try to soften the effects of it. And I was given a lot of ways you can work within the system by the people who I know that stayed in the system, who were very much concerned, just like I was. In fact, I wouldn't say they were any, we were all concerned in government about what this policy was going to mean, but it turned out there were only 3 of us that resigned over it. Only 3 government employees resigned over the war in Iraq. That's in contrast to 15 people who resigned from the British government because of their government's participation in Iraq. 15 resigned there. We don't really have, I don't think, quite a tradition of resignation as on points of conscience. If you look through our history, not many people do resign. Most government employees can figure out a way that you just keep your head down, keep out of the way, keep working. But in other governments, on points of conscience, people do resign, and to alert people that, you know, we really don't agree with this. Behind the scenes, we now know that there were a lot of military people that really didn't agree at all. They knew what was going to happen. You know, we've got more people in our military who are part of what they call the Foreign Area Officer Program, who are specialists in regions. There are more people in that program who are defense attachés, military intelligence people, than we have diplomats. They've lived in the regions just as long as U.S. diplomats have. Our military has really more people that are non-shooting type of people that serve in these types of semi-diplomatic positions than we have actual diplomats. And that group of people were all saying behind the scenes, oh gosh, we know exactly what's going to happen here. We are going to be facing an angry, angry region, and an angry region that probably will lash out at us, and an angry region where young men and women of the Muslim faith, of Arab cultures, will come to Iraq and fight against U.S. forces. And indeed, we've seen that's what's happened. We sure have. Well, I resigned. That was 5 years ago. So we move on. 5 years. On the 5th anniversary of my resignation, the three of us that resigned decided that we were going to write a letter to the world, so to speak, a letter to the world that was going to say what we thought 5 years later. And we weren't really crowing about the fact that I think we called it right, and maybe our government didn't quite call it the right way. But we wanted to make a statement saying that here it is 5 years later, and here's the state of events. And we sent that letter to the New York Times, the Washington Post, the LA Times, the this, that, and the other thing, and nobody published it. Are you surprised? Nobody published it. Not a soul. Until just this last week. And of all places, Waco, Texas. The Waco Tribune, the biggest newspaper closest to George Bush's ranch in Crawford, Texas, published our letter. And here it was, almost 6 months after we wrote it. I was actually speaking in Waco, Texas. You know, you always like to go down to Crawford to, you know, put a little poke at the president. And, you know, he's not going to be there long, and he was going to be back in Crawford this last weekend. So I actually had already made arrangements to speak in several different towns in Texas, and it was a coincidence that I was speaking in Waco just as he was arriving in town. But here was this letter that in Waco, they published it. And then I was invited to speak at Baylor University, a conservative Baptist university. It wasn't like I spoke to the whole student body. I mean, they've not moved along that far. But I did speak to a public service internship class. And here are young men and women who are going out to serve in, pardon me, in city level, state level, federal level internships. And